This is the Sonder Community Podcast. Our goal is simple: better ourselves and better the world. My friends, this is Corey Moore with the Sonder Community Podcast. I realized that I might not have even said my name up to this point, so if you've been listening to this and you're like, who the heck is in my ears and why should I care? I don't know why you should care, but to be clear, it is me, Corey Moore. I'll talk a little bit more about myself, what we're thinking about doing for like the Sonder community as a whole, some of my goals with the open letter to a dying church, all these different things. And talk about that next week. Was it next week's episode? I'm going to call it More Thoughts, which I think is pretty genius. It's my last name, More. Anyway, as far as today goes, a little heads up on the recording. It got a little funky, so the sound quality is not what we'd like to normally do, but it's fine. It's totally listenable. Just know that it's like just slightly off. One of the things I'm wanting to do within this community is to have not just experts in fields and really, people talking about theories. I really want to give voice to people's lived experience, and and whatever that looks like, to say, hey, you are somebody who's been important to me, or you have your viewpoint of what reality is, and let's hear about it. Today is actually one of my dear friends, Shannon Adams. She is somebody who we have never actually lived in the same city since we've been friends, but she's somebody that it's one of those people that you just connect with and you're like, oh, we get it. You get me on a deeper level. I hope that she would say the same thing about me. Maybe she wouldn't. But we get to just get a little view of what the past few years have been like for her. She's been through these, she's gone through the ringer with some health issues and community and beliefs changing. It's just a whole lot going on. So yeah, I'm really glad that I got to have a conversation with her and record it. But even since the recording of this, she's actually decided to, due to medical bills and due to support and all these different factors, she's moving across the country to live with some other really good friends. And in the show notes, we'll have a way that you can support her in this transition of life, if that's what you want to do. Because that's something that I want to be a part of the Sonder community, is that it doesn't matter our physical location. We're able to love our neighbor. We're able to be generous and take care of each other, whether or not we're neighbors, like physically, to transcend our physical location, to have relationships with people. And so, if you have a baby, I would love to be a part of the meal train, to take care of you. And so same goes for this situation. So if you want to support her in this transition, feel free to. But without further ado, here's Shannon Adams. Shannon Adams, welcome to the Sonder Community Podcast. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I met Shannon, and actually, how did we meet? I mean, it was something at the church.
Yeah, something I'm not even quite sure. Saw you and fell in love with you.
Yeah, same. Shannon's a little older than me. I was an intern at the church, and constantly, every time I would see her, and I had a lot of struggles. I had a lot of frustrations with these people who were older than me, and I had a lot of people who didn't quite believe in me as much as I wish they would. And I felt like Shannon was always somebody who would stop by, and she was, Shannon's in Florida, I'm in Illinois. She would fly in every once in a while and stop by and just say how much she loves me, how much she cares about me, how proud of me she was, and all these different moments of like, I want you to know how special you are. And I feel like that's just what I think of when I think of Shannon, is just like somebody who's willing to stop all the time and just say, you are so special. I want to be fully, I mean, like the Mr. Rogers of my life, essentially, of like, you are special to me and I love you. And I mean, Shannon, you'd give me, and Sarah, I mean, I'm sure you remember, of like randomly $100 just to go on dates whenever we were poor interns. You know, it's just, you're such a kind and generous person, not just with your money, but with your time, with your words and all that stuff. So I am just so glad to be able to have somebody like you on the podcast, and yeah, to be able to hear from you a little bit.
Wow. I mean, being referred to as your Mr. Rogers, that might be the highest compliment I've ever been paid in my life.
Well, there you go.
I'm getting a little choked up over here.
Same. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, Shannon. You and I met in the church. You were in the church world for a while, and then you stepped down. Just give us a quick overview. What's your story?
Yeah, I wasn't even just in the church world. The church was my world for most of my life. So there's that. Yeah, I'm from South Florida. Beautiful place that, I live where you vacation. So that's wonderful. It's awesome, culturally diverse. We have access to, nearly every culture, and I love it. I love my upbringing. In terms of that. I started going to church when I was a teenager and never stopped until, this last little bit of my life.
Sure.
And I dove headfirst in, have a very complicated and trauma-filled life prior to that point. So that's really exciting. Might write a novel about that one day or something. But yeah, I went to a ministry training program, and from there I was on staff at the church in Illinois for a few years, thus becoming my one of my safe places at that point, and would come back and visit, which is where I met you, Corey. And from there, I was on staff at another church after I moved back home here to South Florida for over a decade, doing lots of different jobs and having lots of different titles, all the while navigating my own journey and development and questions and struggles and all of that kind of stuff. But the church was not just my job, it was my world, it was my identity, it was all that I knew. And I didn't function outside of it for a very, very, very long time. But above even church, though, one thing people should know, like, people are my favorite thing. Like,
Yeah.
People are my absolute favorite. I love people, and I mean that sincerely. Yeah.
Well, I think you were one of the people who, it's like, you have different types of like churches or world where you're like, church is my world, and I want to make the biggest, best service in the world, possible. I want to play the best music. I want to be the best communicator in the world. And then you're the other type of person who, church is my world because of my love for just people. And I think the other side is a little bit in there too, it seems like, but I think you're on the side of like, this is so much about the people I interact with and people who I love and I want to see the best for.
Yeah, that was the goal. And I thought that was what I thought that was what I was a part of.
Sure.
So, yeah. Yeah.
So you do that for your whole life, and then you're on staff at this church. You said you've transitioned out. So what does that transition look like? What started that? What were the feelings?
Yeah. So I would say probably about 5 or 6 years ago, there was some budget cuts that happened at the church, which happens at every church, right? Money is always a factor in most decision making at churches. It just is. It is what it is, right? And I was brought down to part-time. I started working at a nonprofit that worked with at-risk and in-need girls in public high schools, and I loved it, but I was still part-time at the church. And I did that So I was working full-time and part-time. So I had 2 jobs, both heavy jobs, not easy to do, not easy to juggle. There was some uh, incidences that happened at the church that were really messy, really, for legal matters, I can't really jump into all of that. But it just was awful. And that was part of the reason that they were making some of these cuts. And that was kind of the first moment where I was like, oh, I'm not really sure what's going on here.
Sure.
I thought this is what I was going to be doing forever. Like I thought this was it, like church was
Yeah.
it. And suddenly I'm not doing that. And I kind of don't know. It rocked my world for sure. Cause suddenly I wasn't like Shannon church girl. I was like Shannon doing another job and like church is a side gig.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's like, not everyone gets a paycheck from the church and people just go to church, but that was just like not on my radar because it hadn't ever been, like that
Right.
hadn't been my reality up until that point. Fast forward a few years later, and I had took a hit with my health, and I got diagnosed with lupus, and subsequent a couple of other different diseases and comorbidities, keyword buzzword these days.
Yeah.
Um, and I could no longer function in the same capacity of working full time and continuing to serve part time at the church, and just raised a white flag and said, hey, I need some help. Like, I can't keep doing this. And there were some discussions, nothing really came about it. So I kept plugging away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the church came to me and said they could no longer pay me for the part-time position that I was in, but they still needed me to keep working in that same capacity because they didn't have anyone to fill that need. And
Classic.
I'm like, I'm like a gap filler team player. Like, uh, you know, I don't want there to be anything that falls through, and it's all about people. And if I don't keep doing this, like the people are the ones that are going to be hit by that or whatever. And so I kept doing it at this, really to my own consequence, like to really, I was putting my health on the line at that point. And I said, I can't keep doing this. I had a breakdown with my staff member that was over me at the time, a pastor on the church, and said, please help me. And at that point, I was involved in a bunch of different ways. I was leading worship and helping with production and media and all that kind of stuff. And I asked for very specific help, and they stripped me of everything.
Mm.
And I found out from other people.
Wow.
And it threw me for a loop. And suddenly I had no identity because I was no longer serving in these roles.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I was just like nameless, faceless. I didn't know how to function. And that's really kind of where the undoing, if you will, sort of started to begin, because I didn't know who I was without church. And the church more or less could keep going without me. It made no difference that I was no longer
Right.
there. And that was a blow that I was not expecting to get hit with, especially while navigating this newfound diagnosis and subsequent hospitalizations and illness and all of this kind of stuff. It just was like this cacophony of just the worst kind of way. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So that's just a little bit of kind of how that kind of came to be. That transition started, and the last few years have been one hit after the next,
Yeah.
so to speak.
I want to hear more about that, but let's take our time
Yeah,
getting
for
into
sure.
what the next little bit has been. But I'm curious, was there anything leading up to? So you're in this like, hey, I'm at my capacity. I'm at my wit's end here. Was there anything in that you're like mentally going to that you're like, okay, I'm having these because you even said like I was on my journey through this whole time. Like I'm having these questions or these frustrations or these weird like why like, is this what I think it is? Because even in the beginning, you're like, well, that's the thing I wanted to be a part of, is this loving people thing. Is this what this is? Did you have any of that? Did you allow yourself to go to those places in your head and be like, maybe this isn't it?
I think I did, but not to the level that I needed to go to.
Sure.
There was always like don't go too far, don't go off the cliff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some of that was out of self-preservation. Some of that was out of like, I need the paycheck. So,
Right.
so don't question too much, because you can't cash the check then, you know what I mean? That sounds terrible. I realize that, but that was the reality that I was in.
Sure.
I think that for most of my Christian walk, I have found myself as an outsider in most traditional church settings in terms of the way that I think, feel, and act. I've always been more liberal than most. I've always kind of been someone who has somewhat of an opposing view and isn't afraid to kind of come at it from a different perspective or ask tough questions. I think that in my last church position, there was frustration that was starting to build because I kind of always found myself on the opposing side, and it was always for the sake of people. Like, there was never a point that I was arguing for production value or budget or you name it. Like, my argument was always for people. I remember arguing points against extended worship services because I was like, what's the point of continuing to serve the people in this room when there are so many people outside of this room that could benefit? Like, we're just continuing to reach the same people over and over and over again. Like, there's so many other people that could benefit from this, and feeling continuously shut down. There were some tense moments in my journey on staff there. There were some toe-to-toe moments with our lead pastor that I had, because I wasn't afraid to stand up, because I wasn't doing it for my own sake. I felt very I am not someone who will fight for my own benefit, but dare me not to fight for the benefit of somebody else. You know what I mean? So
you're really good at the love your neighbor. You're not so good at the love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah. I forget about that part quite frequently.
That second half. Yeah.
I'm still learning that part. I fail that part on the test quite often. So there was tension building quite frequently over the years in that sense, but I felt like it was my duty to keep being that thorn, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Like, if no one else is going to voice this differing opinion, if no one else is going to stand up, if no one else is going to say these things or be that, like, I'm going to continue to do that. So I felt like I was almost there on purpose to give that kind of difference in opinion.
Yeah.
But it gets really tiring when you're always that person.
Oh yeah, totally.
And when you're in it alone, and when you're fighting the church to be the church.
Yeah.
Like, not to say that there weren't good moments, and not to say that there wasn't good fruit, quote unquote,
quote unquote. Yeah.
But ultimately, for me, the decision to walk away was, my heart was getting sick in that environment.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get healthy in the same environment that made me sick. Like, I couldn't stay with all of that tension, because it was gonna lead to bitterness at some point. And
that's okay.
Like, it's really hard to love people when you're like just seeping bitter. You know what I mean? Totally. Like, it's really hard. So for me, it was like, I can keep loving people, or I could stay.
Yeah.
It was kind of the tension of it all. And I'm still wrestling. Like, I don't think that I've landed somewhere concrete yet. And I'm okay with that.
Maybe that's not
But
the goal.
yeah, I don't think it is. I don't think it is.
So you are in this position, you've realized, oh, okay, the church can keep moving on without me. You are sick, you're kind of at your wit's end. How do you feel like you're stepping out of your church staff? And you left the church completely? Like you weren't attending after you weren't working for?
So I kind of had an easy way out. I never made like a big declaration of like, I'm Shannon and I'm leaving. Like I never did that. I
Right,
kind of
right.
slowly like, so with my treatment course and everything like that, I was put on heavy duty immunosuppressants. And my doctors were saying, if you go out into large crowds, you have to be
Sure.
really careful because you can
This is
catch anything.
pre-COVID too,
So
right?
this is pre-COVID. So wearing a mask, things like that, so the irony of it all was that I was having to wear masks if I was going to go into uh, large gatherings, and I was looked at like I was like a freak of nature. Like I was looked at like, who is this girl? What is going on? Like I was wearing masks on planes and people were like, oh my gosh, what is this girl trying to hide? Like just looking at me like super suspicious, and all this kind of stuff. So
You're just
for
on the cutting
me,
edge of fashion, so that makes sense.
yeah, I was a trendsetter for sure.
Yeah, basically.
Um, which was really beneficial because when COVID first started and you couldn't get masks anywhere, I already had a stockpile.
Got him.
Ayo.
Hey, there you go.
Uh,
There's the positive.
there's always a positive.
Silver linings.
Silver linings for sure. Um, and I didn't want the spotlight on my illness. I didn't want people to suddenly start paying attention to my presence because I was sick and they noticed me because I was wearing a mask or I was, you know what I mean? Like I just didn't
Yeah.
want to be the reason that people noticed I was there.
Like a sympathy, like one of those calls.
Yeah. And I also so lupus is not curable. Science has not come around so far to find a cure for lupus. So this is something I'm going to have for the rest of my life. And I was having a really hard time with people, well-meaning, very well-meaning people, continuously coming up to me to pray for me, wanting to see me healed, and you're gonna get better soon. And I'm like, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
Like this isn't, and kind of wanting to, tick a box in their Christian card. And like there be real moments when I don't want you to pray for my healing. I want you to pray because my heart hurts. I'm sad. And that really is more predominantly my need right now versus this, but you don't care to ask me. You just jump in and go with what you want. I just didn't want that to be how I was noticed. So it kind of made my transition a little easier to step back and say, I could blame it. I could use my illness as a crutch a little bit to kind of give me some space to navigate and to kind of wrestle and to, kind of give me the bandwidth to say, where am I at in this? What's going on, without having to make a definitive declaration, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It was kind of like a natural transition out. And that's kind of how that happened practically.
Yeah. But we all have relationships that are just, temporary. They're in flux. You're not best friends with all the people that you went to high school with or that you worked with in the past. And
Wait, you're not?
Well, I am. Well, I mean, actually, some of my best friends are from when I was in high school, but that's not the point. But you have these relationships that are in flux, but then you have relationships that you're like, oh man, I thought this was different. Do you feel like there was a lot of support, genuine support, not like I'm sympathy supporting you? And I hope that when you felt that from other people of like, we love you because we love you, and we're checking in you because we're checking in on you because you matter to us, not because of you're some sympathy case.
Yeah,
You feel
for
like you had
sure.
that support from the church after you left, or did you kind of feel like this is you? I don't know. Where'd you guys go?
I think it's been a mixed bag for me. I think that old adage, out of sight, out of mind, kind of comes into play.
Yeah.
I realized it was actually kind of a point where I was like, whoa, I had to do some evaluation of my own self. Is that um, I realized that if I wasn't there, there were so many people who I genuinely thought I was very close to,
Yeah.
that weeks and weeks and weeks would go by and there'd be no communication, no check-in. If I wasn't the one reaching out, there'd be no, like, it wouldn't happen. And I'm like, oh wow, okay, like I get it. But then it kind of brought me to a place of like, I've probably been guilty of the same thing. Like, I've been caught up in that swirl too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it really was an eye opener for me to be like, dang, I need to go back and send some apologies. Like, I need to make some phone calls and make things right.
Yeah.
Cause I for sure have done the same thing. Um, because you just get caught up in your own world in this, and the church was my world. And as sad as it is to say, is I didn't have friendships outside of the church, very few. Um, I didn't hang out with people outside of the church. I didn't have, most of my connections, came from the church or through the church or because of the church.
Right.
Um, so I think that in the immediate, there was support. I was thinking about this the other day, is that, we say love is, patient and kind, and some translations say long suffering. But when someone is suffering long, there isn't a lot of love.
Mm.
And I think that in the immediate rush of diagnosis and issues and things like that, people were there. But this is a forever kind of thing. And so, again, until modern medicine advances and there's some progress made, but the longer I go in my battle with these diseases, the less there is of people being present and showing up and
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. And I think some of it is maybe intimidation. People don't know how to continue to love you when things aren't better,
Mhm.
because they're so programmed in the church to like, have faith, things are going to get changed, things are
Yeah.
going to change, and there's going to be miracles. And then when that doesn't happen, they just don't know, like, that tense sense of like toxic positivity, like they just don't know how to function when things don't go right.
Right.
And like, this is real life, like things
Yeah.
don't go right,
Yeah.
like
Totally.
like all things do not work out for good. Like, I'm sorry, that's just not how, like, I don't think like it all is
Doesn't feel
hunky
good. That's for
dory.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like it doesn't all feel good, I should say. Yeah, that's a better way to phrase
Well,
it. Like,
it's not Instagrammable good too. It's not like the sexy good. It's like, well, I mean, we'll get to the good things that you've seen along with it, but the suffering is still there. It doesn't take away the suffering.
for sure. And I think that people just people just didn't know what to do with that, and still don't
Yeah.
know what to do with that. Like, the how are you feeling text gets really old really fast,
Yeah.
and people don't know what to say beyond that. And I'm like, you could just talk to me like a normal human being. There's so much to me besides illness.
Right.
There's so much to me besides, you know what I mean? But people can't get past that. And so where church used to be my identity, I feel like now a lot of my identity is wrapped up in illness, which is like another like frustration point that I'm wrestling with in the moment.
Do you feel like that's your identity for yourself or how other people view you?
I think it probably is both. And I have to
Okay.
fight the battle not to identify myself with illness,
Yeah, sure.
and not to just say, this is all I'll ever be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to kind of be like, no, there's more to you, Shan. There's
Right.
kind of coach myself through that. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry, I was kind
No,
of
no,
very.
that's no, that was good. That was, I mean, I mostly just was curious because I feel like there's sometimes where people have like put you in categories, and then there's times where you put yourself in categories. And I wasn't sure if it was like you feel like everybody else is looking at you like, oh, Shannon's, if there's a list of labels that put on Shannon, Shannon is sick and at home, or if that was how you felt about yourself. So,
I think sometimes I do, yeah. But I'm trying to break out of that for sure.
yeah. Oh, you talking about people not knowing what to do with suffering and like all this stuff. It reminds me, I was just reading a book on Dorothy Day. She was like this founder of the Catholic workers movement and was an advocate for poor people and all this. I mean, she did so much stuff. But she has this, she's talking about what love is. And one of the biggest things she kept harping on was love is, I mean, this is a summary. I don't have the book in front of me. I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but the idea is basically that like love is long suffering. Love is suffering along with somebody and going through the hard things. I mean, that's why even in, most wedding marriage vows, it's like, till death do us part, because there's sickness and health. There's this really tough look that takes a lot of love to go, I'm going to sit with you in the most difficult season of your life, which may be for the next 15 years. But I want you to know that I love you and I see you more than just this label of sick or poor or whatever the thing is. So, but I think that's really important is to be able to cultivate that. And I think that is something, it's hard to know how do you suffer along with somebody, especially it's one thing to suffer alongside a spouse, but it's another thing to suffer alongside a really good friend who lives down the street from you or across the country from you. It's complicated and it's not easy, but it's not something that we should give up on trying to learn, because it's something that we should
For sure.
be trying to cultivate.
No, that's good.
So you are now sick. You've lost your community, people who you're like, okay, there's some people who I really, really thought we were more than just this. And like, this is just weird. Now your identities on the chopping block, it's been decapitated or whatever. It's like, who is Shannon now without, because you're having to be alone for the most part, especially when it's COVID hits, you're completely isolated for the past however long.
Totally.
Who is Shannon now? It's like this scene in Zoolander where Zoolander's trying to remember who he is, and he's praying to God, and he gets a phone call on his little tiny phone, and he answers it. God, that's just what I think of it. Like, is that you? But like, who am I? And he's like looking at the puddle, and he's like, who am I? Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point being, what does this look like? You're going through. I mean, Richard Rohr says, and he's who I heard it from. I don't know if it's he's him who originated it, but he says we have the most transformation in life whenever we have great love and great suffering.
Yeah.
And you've sure had a lot of the suffering. And I mean, we'll talk about more of the love too, and the transformation that's come with that. But like, what is this beginning of this transformation over the past, was it 2 years, 3 years now?
Yeah, 3 years about, yeah.
Yeah. So what does that look like? Yeah.
I think that through suffering, you get to prioritize what really matters. I think that the fluff kind of falls away, if that makes sense. Like, you don't sweat the small stuff. I know that seems cliche, but when you're in the hospital and when you're getting more bad news and when you're getting, overwhelmed and your body is failing you, you the little things that triggered you just don't anymore. And I think that you start to evaluate like legacy, and you start to evaluate almost, I mean, this sounds a little bit dramatic, but I started to evaluate like, what is it that I want to leave behind? Like, when my life ends, what is it that I want people to talk about? like what I don't want them to have to lie at my funeral, you know? Like I want there to be I want it to be easy for people to say nice things
Right.
when I'm gone. And I started to evaluate, well, if that's what I want the legacy to be, I need to work backwards from there. Um, so I can't physically do the same things that I did before. I can't show up in the same ways. I was always the person that so and so sick, I'm going to be there with the chicken soup and the
Mhm.
kombucha and the flowers just because you don't ask, you just do it. But that's just not within my capacity to do so anymore. I mean, I can sometimes, but I can't do it every time. And my desire is to do it every time.
Right.
But how can I show up? It's sending the text messages. It's when someone comes to my mind, telling them. It's not withholding my affection. It's not withholding my you know, affirmation. It's sending cards in the mail because I can do that, from
Right.
my little cave of wonders that I can't leave. Things like that. I think that I've also I've also had the opportunity to meet, go places and be places that other people can't be in. I've been in the hospital rooms and the hospital wards and the doctors waiting rooms and places like that are so scary for people to be in. um and I've been in the infusion centers next to the patients that are all of this kind of stuff, suffering alongside of them, but able to be someone to just listen
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I can tell you, like, my my goal is not to fake it, but like being gentle, being kind, smiling. Like when you're in a position where you're about to get some devastating news and someone has like a gentle smile towards you in the waiting room, it really does make all the difference in the world.
Sure.
And I remember when people have done that stuff for me. And so, like, I can do that also. And so, my suffering has brought me to places that I would never have had the opportunity to go, and most won't ever get the opportunity to go.
Yeah.
And so, I look at that as opportunity. Even with like online support groups, I have communities of people of other chronic illness warriors that I have access into to kind of to relate to communicate with, to say, yeah, me too. I mean, that's so powerful, even just to say, shoot, yep, me too.
Yeah.
you know Nothing else has to be said, but just to
Nothing
know
else.
someone else has, like, where I can't get that from my friends who don't know what it's like, to be able to go to a group of strangers and them to be able to say, oh yeah, I totally understand what that's like. There's so much liberation that happens in those moments. Like, I've cried reading people's like posts before, just because I'm like, someone gets it, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, so there's been a lot of awakening that's happened while I have suffered, in the suffering, there's been a lot of awakening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you said it already. The idea of life isn't just the ups. It's not the hypes. It's not the just like the solution's going to be there. Life is also so frustrating and suffering and all these difficult times. And the realistic thing is that we're all going to die. We're all going to get to a point where we're sick, where our bodies are falling apart. I mean, some of us might die in a car crash. Who knows? But for the most part, hopefully, we live a long life that is at some point we just get sick. That's the
Yeah.
reality of it. But the beautiful thing, and I mean, it sounds like, and I want maybe to hear more about it, is like that suffering. I mean, the suffering is difficult, but there's also these beautiful moments that you're having with people who it's like, oh, while I feel so alone and isolated from these people who I thought I was friends with, you or Instagram post or Facebook post or whatever, you get what I'm going through. You
For
get this
sure.
whole thing. I'm connecting with whoever at the hospital. I mean, tell me more. What has been those moments of like this? It's the idea of the lotus in the mud. out of this mud, out of the gross, out of the dirty comes this beautiful flower. And it's like, what are those beautiful lotuses in your,
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, have there been? I might be just making that up. I don't want to
yeah,
project that
no, no,
onto you.
no. No, there have been for sure. I'm trying to think of some specific moments. Um, there's one moment that um even when, if you can't relate, like there being a compassion and an empathy, like that's just really okay. So there's this one moment I was going in for my umpteenth test. I was getting a CAT scan of my brain. Okay. And they strap you into this table if you've never had a CAT scan, and they put your
Mm.
head in a cage, and they you know, you get an IV in your arm, and it's a big ta-da. It's not
There's no
fun.
cats involved in this.
There's no cats that are scanning you for anything,
God, that would
unfortunately.
be so much better.
As far
God,
as I
it
know,
wouldn't
as
make
far as I
it.
know,
That's fair.
there could be little cats in the machine somewhere that I'm not seeing, but
I mean, that would ease a little bit of the tension of it for sure.
um, but you get rolled into this metal tube, and you're there just you know, like strapped into this table for about 45 minutes while they scan you. And it's terrible. Like it's not fun. It's really loud. The machine is like this close to your face. It's awful. Okay. And it was a really bad week. I was feeling really crappy, and they'd already strapped me in, and then they're going to put the IV in. And at this point, I know my body very well, right? I'm very in tune with what works, what doesn't work, where it works, all that kind of stuff. So I tell the nurse, you know, what vein is going to be good. And I say, I have tattoos on my arms, and I use one of my tattoos as a marker for where she can get an IV. And I tell her exactly where to go and where the vein is, and I tell her how deep it is and whatnot or whatever. And she sticks the IV, and she gets it the first time, and she just pauses, and she puts her hand on my arm, and she whispers, "I hate that you know that."
Yeah.
And I don't know, there was something about the tenderness of the
Yeah.
moment of like this medical professional who there isn't a lot of compassion in the medical fields. Like they're just, that's another topic for another day. But just that gentle moment of her saying, "I hate that you know this." And her in her hand, just the humanity of that touch. And with my head strapped into this cage, I just like there just a tear started streaming down my face. And there was something so beautifully that like broke open this place in my heart of like, I'm seen in this moment,
Yeah.
you know? That she doesn't know that that moment was so profound for me that I'm still talking about it 2 years later, you know. But uh, there's something really powerful about being seen, you know, in the mud, about being seen in your suffering,
Mhm.
even by a stranger. That has really been powerful. And I'm sure there are other stories that I can't think of right now. I know for sure there are, but that's the one that sticks out at this moment.
Yeah. So you have this sickness, you have all this going on. You're experiencing like, I mean, true, true reality of life. You're experiencing, I mean, just the full spectrum of human compassion and human, I mean, not abandonment may be a strong word, but abandonment or whatever the phrase is, you know,
Sure. Yeah.
you're going through all of this, and you have all these medical bills stacking up. And then you have this GoFundMe that you've had for a little while. Tell me more about how did this start? Tell me about it.
So actually, about a year ago, in addition to the lupus and all of this kind of stuff, a year ago, I was diagnosed with endometrial cancer on top of everything. And I subsequently, because of that, lost my job because of treatment and all of the kind of stuff. Lost my job, got diagnosed with cancer, had to go for surgery, all this kind of stuff. And it just was talk about kicking you when you're down,
Right.
If I've already had enough hits, if we can stop the hits from coming, that's fine. Uh, I'm okay with no more hits happening. And I didn't know, I kind of was like, well, that's it. I what do I do now? Like I have no options. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know where to turn. And I had come to the end of my rope, and I was like, I need people. Like, people are going to be the only thing that help me through this. And it's vulnerable and scary, because as much as I want to be the one to love and show up and serve, it is very intimidating to be on the other end of that. I don't want to come across as weak, even throughout all of this illness and journey and all that kind of stuff. um it's just a very vulnerable position to be in when you're dependent on other people to show up for you. So, especially when my heart is already raw and tender from experiencing all these transitions, and like you said, going through like people not showing up the way that I expected them to show up and all this kind of stuff. And now being in a place where like I am literally dependent on you to show up if I'm going to make it these next few days, these next few months or whatnot.
Hmm.
Um, and so I put together a GoFundMe and was like, help me kick cancer, help me kick cancer's tail. Like, I cannot do this alone.
Hmm.
Like, I can try really hard, but like, I know that I'm at the end of my rope coming into this already on like
Yeah.
this isn't like I've been doing really great at life and I just got a cancer diagnosis. Like, I've already been like flailing and then I got a cancer diagnosis.
Right.
So like, um
Did you have
let's
insurance for this, by the way?
so I had insurance through so in the course of that, I had actually transitioned out of the nonprofit and into a company, a friend's company, and had pretty decent insurance. That's like a pretty, like, so thankful for that, because otherwise I would have been really screwed for sure.
So
Uh,
you're doing that job for money. You had insurance through that job, and it was decent.
yeah, it was decent for sure.
And then the medical
But
bill still came in, and
oh yeah, insurance. I mean,
I know that's why I'm asking about it, because I just want to hear some.
I could write a book on my experiences with the medical world. Like,
I
just
want you to. I
oh
want to
my
be very. I want
gosh,
to read it and just be so upset. I want to
it
say
will it
this
will
needs to
make you
change.
so upset. It does need to change. It needs to change. It needs to change. That is politics and healthcare and all that stuff. Okay. Anyways, that's not what we're talking about right now.
We'll talk about that another time. But it's just I wanted to make sure you had insurance, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh my god, these bills are coming in.
And because I don't know if it's because of South Florida, because, hospitals have been screwed down here before or whatever, but like, now you have to pay stuff up front. So like, before surgeries, they're like, you got to pay your co-insurance before we'll do anything. You got to pay this
Hmm.
before we'll even see. So it's not like, okay, just bill me later and I'll figure it out. Like, no, it's like, show up with a check or you're not getting things done,
Wow.
you know? Um, and I'm already having medical bills for the last 3 years of stuff coming up. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um, so I was like, and now I'm out of work. I don't have a job.
Right.
I'm going to be down and out for months recovering. And then there's treatment on top of that. So who's to say what this journey looks like
God.
and when I'll be able to go back, and if my body will cooperate and what that looks like. And I just threw out a Hail Mary and was like, help me. And people showed up huge. And people are still showing up.
Yeah.
It's been the surprise of my life to see how generous and compassionate people have been to me over and over and over again. And when I think that I have um, used up all the reserves of people's generosity, when I squeezed people's hearts dry. Someone just, like the other day, I was sitting on the couch reading, and I get a notification, and someone had just PayPal'd me some money and just said, "Here, just because."
Hmm.
Like
Love it. That's a Shannon move, though. You're reaping what you've sown. You still got a lot more to reap, though.
I don't know about that. I feel like I have gotten so much more than I've given out in the world. But I mean, I've been blown away by how people have shown up. I mean, I'm talking like people that I maybe met once or twice, giving thousands of dollars.
Wow.
Uh, you know, uh, Someone not too long ago just said, "Hey, can I get your address?" This is someone that I randomly came across when I was on staff at the church. I couldn't even tell you a single fact about her. Okay, beyond her name, to be quite honest.
Hmm.
Um, and I get a check for $2,000 in the mail
Wow.
because the corporation that she works for allows uh, employees to ask for grants to be given when it's their birthday to different organizations, and she petitioned for them to give one to me for her
Wow.
birthday. I mean, come on, this is like kindness like I've never seen before.
Right.
um, and it has done so much for my weary soul to see
Yeah.
the good in humanity, to see the genuine kindness and goodness in humanity again, um, and to know that it's not tied or attached to anything that I've done.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Totally.
I'm not earned this. I'm not like working for the church. Like I'm not like these people are not benefiting from me in any way right now. And that has been like, as someone who wants to earn love, and that's been my pattern in my life, to receive people's kindness with no strings attached and having not earned it, it's hard. It's really hard for me,
Yeah.
but it's really beautiful for what it's done to my heart for sure.
Well, I mean, you're talking at the beginning of how you're just always not an advocate for bigger worship experiences or bigger lights in the church, or you weren't an advocate for all these things. You're an advocate for people. But maybe I forgot about myself sometimes. And here,
For
I mean, it
sure.
reminds me of, I mean, I told you this before we talked, but even it reminds me of Ram Dass, who was this spiritual guy who just was all about being here, present in the moment, loving and accepting exactly what it is as it is, and loving each other, love your neighbor as yourself, essentially. And he wrote this book, How Can You Help Me? Whenever, he was growing up, or not growing up, but whenever he was coming to popularity, he wrote this book, How Can You Help Me? And then years later, he has this stroke, and becomes completely dependent on other people. And he goes, if I could rewrite this book, I would rewrite it and make it, how can you help me? And this idea of being, he's like, this is my, what is looked at as weakness right now as my weakness is requiring so much more strength than any of my serving, any of my generosity, any of my kindness ever did. Is just my being able to say, I need help, and being dependent on somebody else. And I think that, there's something to that. I need help, and I need to love myself. And if I'm not going to be an advocate for me, or I need to do what I can to be an advocate for me, and I'm going to make myself a GoFundMe. And to see, and it's complicated. You have these people who don't know how to deal with suffering, and they're like, how do I meet you emotionally and connect with you? But then you also have all these people who are like, here's $1,000, here's $2,000. And you're like, how? I mean, that isn't the same as meeting my emotional needs and like connecting with me as a person to make me feel seen and loved. But
Sure.
at the same time, it's practical, and I need help, and I need love, and I
Totally.
need the money, and it's complicated. Yeah.
It is really complicated. Yeah. And I think that that's, people ask me like, How can I help? How can I show up? And when you're in the middle of suffering and struggling, it's hard to answer those questions.
Yes,
You
totally.
know, it's hard to say X, Y, and Z. Please do these things for me.
Mm-hmm.
Which is when I'm feeling well, I try to coach people in how to show up for people. Like, instead of saying like, let me know if you need anything, be like, hey, here's 3 ways that I can show up for you. Choose one. I
Sure.
remember one of my closest friends who knows my tendencies, who knows my inability to receive help, said, I'm either going to come clean your bathroom, I'm going to do a load of your laundry, or I am going to, I forget what the third option was. So choose one of those 3, like, this is how I'm going to show up for you. Choose one, which one of those best suits you,
Wow.
you know? That's
And
way
that's
more.
suffering along with somebody. That's long
Right. And
suffering.
it didn't cost her anything to come grab a load of my laundry. You know what I
Right.
mean? And I think like the beauty of even of saying the story of what, like, my lotus in the mud moment, that woman, that nurse didn't give me anything physically, right?
Right.
Like, but even she suffered along with me by seeing me in that moment. And I think that that's part of what we could do better as a society, is like the with part,
Yeah.
like just being with someone is more than enough oftentimes,
Yeah.
whether it's with someone virtually by FaceTiming or sending the text or having the phone call, or with someone by just sitting on the couch and vegging out, you know what I mean? Like, it's so simple that you feel like it doesn't make a difference, but it really does make a difference when you are the one suffering, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't require any answers. It doesn't require any performance. It literally just requires being with, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the smartest people on the planet can't give me the answers.
Yeah.
So I'm not expecting it from anyone else, you know? So you don't have to solve it. You don't have to fix me. You don't have to make me better. You don't have to put me back together. You don't have to rid my body of cancer. Just show up, like,
If I
just
could, I
be.
would.
I know you would, you little love bug. Ugh. But just the with part is really powerful,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, Shannon, I love you.
I love you too, Corey.
Do you have any more thoughts that you'd like to hit on before we close up?
It's all a journey, man. It's all a journey. While I'm not involved in church, people still matter to me. Um, Spirituality still matters to me. Faith is still a big part of my life. Just looks different than I thought it would. Um, at the end of the day, we get to love the people that are around us. We get to show up as us.
Yeah.
And do what we can with what we have, and that's all that we can ask for. And yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah. Well, you and people like your situation is what I'm hoping to do, create a space for in this online community thing. The idea of you've been, I don't think that everybody has to be the monk that goes into the wilderness, or the desert father who is, seeking God in isolation and, whatever the thing is, and is completely alone and abandoned. And I think leaving a church community and facing some of the stuff that you faced, and especially whenever you're like, I literally can't go be around people because my immune system is compromised.
Yeah.
I think that is, that doesn't mean that you have to. I mean, God, we live in 2022 now. We have the ability to FaceTime. We have the ability to have connection with people that isn't about proximity. And so I'm hoping to be able to create a space for people like you, for people who are all over the place, who are like on these journeys that feel like, I feel like I'm in the middle of the desert by myself, and let's just build up some tents together. We might all be in the middle of the desert or in our own little versions of whatever our desert is, but to go, let's just build our tent together. And I might not be able to stop by in Florida and do your laundry for you. But, what can we do to help? That's, I'm not asking you right now, but I'm just trying to say.
No, for sure.
Yeah. But I love you. I really appreciate you being willing to chat and
I loved being
be
with you.
vulnerable about this stuff.
Anytime.
I hope that you mean anytime, because I'd love to talk to you all the time about things. But
anytime.
Shannon, it's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.
Thank you for listening. Feel free to continue to join us on the podcast. As always, all content is also written on our website. This content is only part of what we do. We want to know you. This is an experiment in creating a community that transcends our physical location. We have regular community pop-ups where we connect and have intellectually honest conversations. To sign up for information, stay up to date with our online pop-ups and events, to join our community on Discord and follow us on social media, check out our website at thesondercommunity.com.